If there is one thing that Don and I put our heart and soul over the last 6 years of leading Harbor, it has been to be in an organization and a space of exceptional culture. That really, I would say, that goal and that desire trumps a lot of other objectives and goals that might be part of any business. And for us, it has clearly taken, the forefront of that. Um, I would say this. What I learned early on when we started this with a lot of wise people and mentors in my life was that um, good culture has to start with the leadership. John Maxwell says this all the time in his books, and I love him as a leadership author. Um, Everything rises and falls on leadership. So if we're seeing an organization rise, it really pivots on the leadership. And if we're seeing an organization go downhill, it's most likely because of the leadership as well. That doesn't mean that all the burden of everything that happens or all the successes of the organization are the leadership's to behold. But what it does mean is that we really are kind of the guardians of what we design. We are the guardians and this is kind of our little Eden that we get to maintain and create.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Kipfer Bros podcast. I am your host, Titus, and joining me from here in Dehradun is David Singh. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, David.
Yeah, thank you, Titus. Pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, so David is the principal and founder as well, right, of Harbour International
Yes.
School. Was there a founding team for that, or were you and your wife the primary visionaries and founders for the school?
Yeah, so my wife and I are the co-founders, and then we established the school along with the board. So there's a team of 6 other people that came alongside us. But as far as the founding goes, me and Donna were kind of the primary people. So, well, I have to take you back to 2017. It was early in the year where, after having lived in New Delhi for about 13 years at that point, both me and my wife began to just feel a sense of like change. And it wasn't just a need to escape or run. It felt bigger than that. And we know that it was the Lord kind of putting and pressing on our hearts that He had something else for us. We had no idea what He was thinking was all of this. Like this was all sort of unveiled to us as we said our yeses and continued to take the next steps. But what I will say, what really wonderfully was how we continued to commit to what God placed before us. And the more we did, and the more we leaned into it, and the more we committed, the more He began to show us what, this was supposed to be. So while a lot of people think that we came out of a lot of strategy and maybe a need and market survey and had a business canvas and really studied things before we launched this is not how it all started. It was very simple in some ways, but also very profound for the two of us. And anytime I have to take people back to why this exists, I take them to the story of where we get our name from and the vision that actually kind of marks that point. So in brief, I'll tell you what happened. The Lord kind of showed us a seaport which had 4 ships, and in this port, these 4 ships were cargo ships. And so the first one was essentially one loaded with shipping containers. It came to the port, it was unloaded and it was sent out to the ocean. The second one was the contrary; it was completely empty. It was loaded with fresh cargo, and then it was sent into the ocean. The third one was very old, just rusted, falling apart, and breaking. Wasn't fit to be on the waters, so that was repaired, fixed, made absolutely brand new, and then sent to the ocean. And finally, the fourth one was built from scratch at the port, and that was then sent to the ocean. So of course, this happened after many months of wrestling with this idea and all that God was doing in our hearts and our passions and aligning our desires with what He was doing. So as we continued to say our yeses, when the Lord revealed this to us, I went and shared this with my wife, Donna, and the first word out of her mouth was Harbor. And we both knew that God just kind of named us, named what He was calling us. And this is even before we had a school in the radar, we had education as our sector and field to go and be into, before any of that did. So it really came out of just this pure calling that God had placed on our heart. And little did we know that we'd be moving back to my hometown here in Dehradun. And when that became clear, we realized that one of the tensions in our mind was why Dehradun? It has a lot of other schools already, and we don't want to be competing with other schools. This makes sense in a place where there aren't other schools. Well, much later in our journey, as we kind of discovered the kind of schools that exist here, we found out that we're probably the only school in this entire northern region that offers this kind of education and is this kind of an international school. And so it was really incredible for us to know that we didn't just respond out of our intellectual strategy or just a desire to do something. It really came out of a very intimate and close journey of knowing God and knowing what his heart desires for people, ultimately. And that's what we responded to. So if I were to identify what the most unique thing about our vision is that Harbor really pivots on two things. And we make that very evident to our community and our students and teachers. And that is, one is we want to see lives change. And the second thing is we really want to see transformation occur around our community. So we want people's, more than just their lives, but also the situations around them, the circumstances they live in, the kind of environments they live in, their families, their relationships and health as a family, as couples in their marriage, in so many of those areas to begin to thrive. And that really is the unique essence of Harbor. And from that stems all the other, what I would call operative, values that drive things that people witness and experience. So that's kind of the story of how it all began. In a nutshell, there's so much more, but that kind of captures our name and also why we're here.
Thanks for sharing that. Can you share some of the initial challenges you faced when starting up Harbor and how you overcame them?
Yeah. I mean, well, for starters, at any time you've got a startup on your hands and you're trying to build something from scratch. I mean, we bootstrapped everything and got started from the very core. And as we were building, we had all the typical challenges that a startup would face, but we had some unique ones as well that maybe many around the world faced when they were launching their businesses or starting off something. And that was COVID. So we started in the year 2020, and it was in the middle of the lockdown when our country had just, imposed a lockdown. We were just about to lease out a property to run the school. A week before that, it fell through, and we're so glad it did because it would have actually locked us into 10 months of having to pay for that. So we had this pivot very quickly and change our entire strategy there of what school would look like altogether and moved online. But the big question was, should a brand new school start in conditions like that? And really was a hard decision to make, but somewhere deep down, we just felt like we just got to do best with what we have. Like we know we're called here to do something, and we went from, of course, 24 students that were committed to start with us down to 8 students.
Wow.
But then we just had to begin. We knew that if we don't start now and delay that, we're probably just setting ourselves back by a few months or years. And since no one knew how long that thing would last, we were just beginning to, just take our confident steps in faith and say, well, if it has to start, let's just do it, and we'll do our best, and we'll see where this goes. We, of course, went a year and a half online before we could actually find our first, rental property to run the school, and then we transitioned. So that was hard in many ways, but just like any other challenge that can turn into an opportunity, it was kind of that, because on top of that, Donna and I were just welcoming our baby in the month of March. So we were brand new parents, and we were launching our business. And of course, pandemic was going on, the lockdown and the whole gamut was occurring in our lives. And it somehow turned into into an opportunity that we were able to lead the school through that while we had a baby in the house. It worked really well for us in that sense. Of course, not saying it wasn't stressful and we didn't have to juggle cameras on one end and a baby on the other side and switching roles as we were trying to do events online. It was crazy, but also really helpful to be home. But
Right.
then the other thing that, of course, anyone starting anything new would realize that you need a very specific kind of person that says yes to working with you and serving with you in those early days. It's usually not people who, are saying yeses for what it offers them. There are
Hmm.
people with passion that really see your vision and believe in it and have a hope for the redemptive change that it could bring. And so we didn't actually have people when we moved here. So it wasn't like beyond the board we had all these number of teachers lined up and we had done our surveys to have them all sort of ready to step in. There was nothing like that. And I remember just, in the very early stages before the school was launched, we would just pray and ask God, like, we need teachers. And the kind of teachers our school would need is not the kind we could just advertise for, in our local landscape of workforce here. So, but then again, even that challenge was met with very good, right teachers, even in the beginning, who had that heart, who had that passion, who brought in their everything because they believed in what we were doing. So
Right.
those are a few challenges that were some, of course, unique to our situation and circumstance, but also I think something that a lot of people will relate to this, especially if you're an entrepreneur, you start businesses, is that unless you go to a business school, and even for those who have gone to business school, actually starting something is very different than what you learn it's supposed to look like.
Hmm.
And that was challenging for me and Donna, because we had no idea. Like, we were just educators and educators that were called to do this. And so we had to educate ourselves about not education, but a very different aspect of leading the organization, figuring out business. I mean, thinking about finances, fundraising, now human resource. How do we manage all of these different moving parts of a business? And that was probably one of the most challenging things for us. But then we continued to have that growth mindset. We continued to learn with whatever avenues and resources we had. But yeah, I think that kind of takes some of those bigger challenges and how we navigated through that. And yeah, we came out of that, and we're in a good space right now as an organization where we're scaling and growing. So yeah, lots of lessons learned.
Great. Yeah, you mentioned that you believe that Harbor is unlike anything else in the region here, and there are a lot of schools in Dehradun and the surrounding
Mhm.
regions. So, what kind of methodology, philosophy does Harbor have that sets it apart from sort of your traditional Indian teaching style?
Well, the reason why I feel like maybe I can speak into this is because I studied myself as a student in the Indian education system. But now here I am leading an international school, and I would say the school that where Donna and I worked in New Delhi was pivotal in shaping what our understanding of education now is. And it was that door that we walked through that completely changed our worldview of education. So what we found was the true potential of education that can change lives and not just equip people. And most often, education is this like tool or this resource to basically set you up to achieve probably a job, a position, or a dream, right? What we experienced in those couple of years was that education in itself is a lifelong process, and that process is the reward. You're not necessarily educating yourself just so you can get something out of it, though you always get things out of educating yourself. But it's the joy of educating yourself that can be so valuable in itself. And we saw that happen with students all the way from early years, preschool, pre-K to high school. So Donna was mostly serving in the elementary school section, and I was more in the middle and high school. So we saw this incredible power of the love of learning in that school. Now, when we started our own thing, we wanted to take it up a notch. We wanted to bring in our philosophy and our vision and some of our goals and dreams that God had placed on our heart to bring that out through Harbor. And what I would say sets Harbor apart, and one might argue, what is really new under the sun, right? It's just
Mhm.
like people just iterate something and then we say, this is new and this is unique, right? Maybe there's wisdom in saying that these aren't new things, they're just versions of what existed. Uh, but the core element, if we took that away, then Harbor won't be what it is today. It would have to be the true motivation and the big why of the people who lead it. And I'm not talking just about myself and my wife, but the entire team. If you walk up to educators and ask them the question, hey, why do you do this? Right? It wouldn't be uncommon to just say, well, because I love kids, right? Because I enjoy being with students, because I love education, because I love this subject. But we believe in something greater. Like there has to be something more that you want education to accomplish, which is why you want to be here. And for us at Harbour, it has to be this kind of this lifelong, but also almost eternal value that it can set perpetually from generation to generation of what quality education that is paralleled with truths of life can do for them. And when you take these two things together by people who are convinced about their why and they know why we're invested in these kids, it is beyond just that content. It's beyond just the curriculum. It's even more than just setting them up for higher ed. It is actually setting them for life to discover themselves, their purpose, and their whys. And I think that's what makes it unique. And that might sound very philosophical, but we do take that and seriously remind ourselves every day in the morning before we start our days with our team and our staff. And we continue to kind of, encourage and champion each other to know why we're doing this. And and I think that's what makes the difference in the education. And yes, I could go on towards the technical jargon of 21st century skills and critical thinking. And of course, all of that is great stuff. And we definitely practice that. And we want to practice all the best industry practices and bring that into our students' experience. Um, but when we have great practices paralleled with real purpose, then the motivation behind that environment is really deep. It's not just superficial that we've got students, we educate them, we graduate them. We're thinking about students 30 years from now. We're thinking about what are they going to be doing when they're our age, and they're thinking about life and why they're there and what they should do and what influence they have just being, people who are made in God's image who can do incredible things. That brings in a lot more perspective. Yeah. So compare, I mean, I really don't like comparing to different educational systems because when you think about different systems, they work in an ecosystem, right? So the Indian education system is successful for the Indian ecosystem. So if you want to be a civil servant in India, in the government, then the best possible education is provided by the Indian education system to get there. What we are bringing in, to the market and offering people is a broader gamut. We're saying, hey, we want to bring a lot more that you can access because of this education and not limiting it to just India, even though it is relevant to India. But we're saying we want to open it up globally and say, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? How can we set you up for all of that? So that is again a unique defining element, but also, each system works in its ecosystem because it feeds into it. And we can debate, all day long which system's better or not. And I think it's an endless debate. But what we've seen is that conviction is everything. So if we know what's really important and we can bring that to our people and give our best, great things start happening.
I'm curious how you were able to develop that because that's something I've talked to a lot of people about, and that's one of the main reasons I wanted you on the podcast. Like, this isn't a education podcast. It's we talk about
Hmm.
entrepreneurship, we talk about leadership.
Right.
But the thing that really was unique to me about Harbour is coming in and seeing an organization. It's kind of incidental that you're an education organization, but seeing an organization with everyone on board so committed to excellence, so united in pursuing that is incredibly inspiring to me. Especially as my older brother and I lead an organization ourselves here in India. I'm just curious, how did you develop that in your team?
Well, I'm really glad in some ways that that's what stands out, Titus, because if there is one thing that Don and I put our heart and soul over the last 6 years of leading Harbour, it has been to be in an organization and a space of exceptional culture. That really, I would say, that goal and that desire trumps a lot of other objectives and goals that might be part of any business. And for us, it has clearly taken, the forefront of that. Um, I would say this. What I learned early on when we started this with a lot of wise people and mentors in my life was that um, good culture has to start with the leadership. John Maxwell says this all the time in his books, and I love him as a leadership author. Um, Everything rises and falls on leadership. So if we're seeing an organization rise, it really pivots on the leadership. And if we're seeing an organization go downhill, it's most likely because of the leadership as well. That doesn't mean that all the burden of everything that happens or all the successes of the organization are the leadership's to behold. But what it does mean is that we really are kind of the guardians of what we design. We are the guardians and this is kind of our little Eden that we get to maintain and create, and it will look a lot like we design it. So, like you said, business, entrepreneurship, leadership, my personal passions as well. So I go beyond the whole education goals and dreams to talk to leaders or people who are just in concept stage of launching something. And maybe you've heard this saying; it's very popular that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that it really, in some ways, while it sounds trivial when you hear it, you're like, that sounds so naive. But when you actually see how effective your strategy is implemented, the executors or the agents to implement your strategy are people. And people's health comes directly from the culture that we create. So going back to Harvard, one of the things we have done is we as leaders, as founders, and also our leadership team that we raise in our school and our organization, we hold ourselves to the highest standards of the culture we want others to practice. But then there are other layers that start to, as you peel away, you start to see, okay, so what makes that culture? And I would say a big one that drives to Harbour is this, we use this tagline called people over product, even though we don't sell product, but it communicates the point that if we are ever in contention of what we're doing, right? So going back to our why, and we're in contention of our policy making, for example, you're taking your HR policy and you're designing that. Are you wearing the lens of people over product in everything, or is it just a strategic, process, or is it just a compliance? Like, oh yeah, we got to build a HR policy to safeguard ourselves, or to have ourselves be, in the clear, or maybe even be a good ethical business. But then asking a higher question and saying, wait, does this policy actually drive the benefit of my people? That is a very different question altogether. And that isn't about compliance. That isn't about even, profits. That really comes down to thriving and flourishing of people. So we took this idea of people over product and we trickled that down to everything. So instead of saying, oh yeah, there are just awesome manuals and policies and guidelines that drive good businesses or good organizations or schools, and we'll just take them, change the name, and they're out there in the open source and we can just download it and use it and it's the standard practice. We chose to write and build everything from ground up, with the intention that this has to fulfill what we believe that people are the most important piece in this formula. So that is something that I think causes that effect to be passed on. The other one I see a lot happening where you don't observe great culture is that people are essentially um, they're a member in the conveyor belt system who just do something, and their worth is that thing. Like you got to put that part in, and that's your worth and your value, and anything beyond that is not really yours to take credit for. And we could, people need purpose. So when we talk about what brings in a great culture, if I eliminate our staff from the big why and the big purpose of why Harbour exists, I know that it will dramatically deplete our culture. Because I always say this to leaders, give this analogy. In fact, I'm sitting in front of a window, so I can, as I'm saying this reminds me too, is that, for leaders, the vision has to be like a glass that has two effects. One, that is a mirror, so you can see yourself, you can see the vision, you can show, you can, yeah, it reflects back whoever or whatever is looking at it. But the other one is that you can see through it in the distance, and that's what people are able to see. So if leadership can create an effect where the people standing right next to me, I'm able to show where we're going and saying, hey, look at this window. And that in the distance is where we're going. But then they can see themselves in the journey of that story and where we're going because it's a mirror too. There is such a strong buy in. They want the vision to succeed because they see themselves in it. They see themselves as an important player in the entire story, not just that piece in the conveyor belt. That's one of the things we try and do. So I actually probably annoy our staff quite often and bring out a lot of conversation about vision and give them the big picture story. But then never have I had anybody come back after those talks and go like, man, you're just wasting our time. Can you just tell me how to do my job for today? They'll always go like, thank you for telling us all of that because it all makes so much more sense to us and it adds to what we do here. And then again, if you've got the buy-in, your culture is going to come. Your culture is created. But if there's one thing I want to leave with, it's essentially modeling what we want to see here. And it takes what I call radical leadership. And so there are three parts in radical leadership that I often talk about. But what that does is if the leadership isn't radically committed to the culture you want to see and we want to create, we will never see it. So yeah, we pursue it by actually being practitioners of what we believe in and then giving the ownership of the people to say, we want you to believe in this. We see you in this. And therefore now we want you to have the freedom to express yourself. So yeah, if I guess the bottom line would be this. If we care about people, if we're in the business of people, which is what I always tell Donna, and she would say this to a lot of people as well. We're in the business of people. And when we do that right, the culture just follows. Good culture just happens.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how whether you're leading a business or a church or a nonprofit or a school, like these same principles
Mhm.
apply, same principles of healthy culture, strong leadership, and all of that. And so, yeah, it's incredible to hear about how you've cultivated that. So this is maybe
Yeah,
a
thank
bigger
you.
deal. This is maybe a bigger deal in the U.S. Than it is here in India, but in the U.S.,
Mhm.
especially Christians, it's pretty controversial whether you send your kid to public school or private school or homeschool, and people have very strong opinions about that. So could you speak
Yeah.
into that? What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of those three?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna have to do this very carefully. Like you said, um, I don't want to offend people and pretend like I know everything of everyone's context. But I'll start by saying this. Um, I know some about the public school, situation in the States. I know a lot more about the public school situation in India. But I also know only secondhand what homeschooling looks like because I was not homeschooled and neither did Donna or I homeschool our son. So I really will not come into this with like experiences to say like, no, I've been through it and I can tell you. But if someone asked me and Donna, why would you choose one over the other? We'd have our reasons, and maybe that's a safe place for me to sort of pivot my rationale on. So if I think about education, I think we have to take a step back before we choose what direction we want to take and what kind of education is good for our family. The bigger question that I think every family should ask is, do we have a vision for our family? Um, do we have a clear sense of what my family should look like? And everything in life, I mean, education is just one thing, but everything, like where are you going to live in the world? What are you going to do? The jobs you're going to do, your hours that you serve, everything can really come through the lens of our vision for our families. And if that is articulated really well, we've got some mesh, we've got a vision field to say, hey, I'm going to stay within that box, because I really know ultimately what I want for my family. And if every family can start there, I think there will be less tension about which one's right and wrong or which is better. And people can just, with pure conviction for what they desire for their families, choose and opt what they want. The problem comes when we're trying to fight about which one's better and which one's worse. And that's where we know that, the whole narrative of like division between certain groups of people and certain sides of the political narrative about education as well comes into it. So staying out of that, here's what I can give you an example of what Donna and I believe in. Now, for us personally, we want our son to grow up and have an education that is not just about information. So that's an important element in our family for his future. We want it to be a highly engaging process where he is learning the deeper whys of what he learned. We want it to contain wrestling through content. We want him to experience things where he's able to really, yeah, like dig deeper into himself and discover his belief systems and arrive at conclusions. We also want him to have many people in his life that can influence him and lead him in a healthy direction. We also want as a family to be able to do what we love doing, which is, we love leadership. We love birthing things. We love to see, people thrive and people flourish. Um, and then ultimately, we'd also really like for him to have a healthy, safe place where, he can succeed. Now, when you take all of these parameters for our family and then you put them together and say, all right, like, what are you saying? It is pretty clear that what we need for Zeke, our son, is a school, right, where he can go and engage with friends, peers, teachers with different and broad, diverse worldviews, right, so that he can wrestle with things and develop his worldview that is strengthened by that process. We want him to be able to dive into more than just content. So it's not just about academics, it is about social interactions. It's a lot about emotional regulation. It's about, yeah, like working those recess, issues with your friend where there's one swing and three kids that want to, swing on one. How do you navigate that? How do you learn empathy? How do you share? Then there's also a clear need for us to have the time to practice what we love, which is to be at work and to build and grow our business and organization. There's also the need for us to invite other adults in his life to say, hey, we'd like you to speak into his life. We want him not to just get everything from his mom and dad. And lastly, we want him to be in a safe place, where we're not constantly concerned about his safety and whether he's in danger. So taking these like five things that I said, we put them together. And not because this is just our school, but Harbour works. Harbour works for Zeke to be here, and we're really happy because he gets that. He gets all of those five things for his growth, and in our best of understanding of how to parent him, this is what we have chosen for him. Now, does homeschooling have benefits over private education, especially if you go into streams of Christian private schools or other secular private schools in India? Yes, I think every system may have an advantage over the other and disadvantages when compared to the other. But it has to come out of that vision, that lens of what do we want for our family. Now, like again, I said, an important part why Donna and I may not choose homeschooling, and I know homeschooling is amazing for a lot of families. So if they know that this is what they want for their kids, they should do it. We always, and that's something that might be surprising. Again, people over product for us doesn't just come for our staff; it also comes for our clients, so to speak. So we've had a lot of families step into our school. They're inquiring to admit their student in our school, and we would tell them, hey, you know what? It would really help our cash flow to have you join the school, especially when we were short of, revenue. But we told them, hey, there is a school here or there is a homeschool co-op here. You may want to check that because it sounds like what you want for your kid aligns better there. And that we might not be the best option for you. And they went. And here's the interesting thing. 6 or 8 months later, this family that had sent their kid to another school because they had very different vision for their child, they recommended HIS to like 3 other families who then sent their kids here, who actually go here now. And so I think that's exactly what we need to do as families is really ask ourselves the question, what do I want out of this? I can say that in a school like Harbour, private Christian school, some of the incredible things that a child gets to experience is that there's an intentionality of an educator who has spent, of course, years training for it, studying it, and brings that expertise into the classroom and is able to give a pretty broad and deep level of educational experience to the students. There's also what I would call social or communal learning that is so critical in a social environment that a school and a private school can bring that really well. And in our context, we try to bring it from the lens that is redemptive, and that adds that sort of truth perspective to things so that people aren't just, yeah, they don't just build their worldviews or their opinions. They're actually being challenged by the truth and what we see and we know and believe the world to be. So, yeah, as I'm kind of thinking about this comparison, I really do think that if there are like essentials each family can identify and then just start weighing them out in each of those three, categories or options of schooling, I am sure that you will have a pretty strong pros and cons list, but then it will weigh heavy on one over the others. And I would say that is probably the best way to go about it because here's what happened. Last time when I tried to have a conversation with someone about whether a private school experience is better than a homeschool, we couldn't even agree on the basis of what we were debating, because what I saw as a flaw of one system, they saw as a advantage of that system. So when the plane is so different, you really can't build any sort of debate or argument in that case. It was a healthy debate. And what we came out of that was, I think both are great and it just works very differently for different people. And if it works for a family, go for it. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that would be the approach I would take. And we would be happy as a school if someone walked into our reception to direct them in the right path if they asked.
Right. Yeah, that's super helpful. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here, but thank you so much, David, for your time. And once again, thank you so much for your vision behind the school, your leadership. It's been hugely impactful in my family's life. And I tell Brenda we can't move away from Dehradun now until our kids graduate high school. So we're going to be here for a bit just because I don't know, where else I would want my kids to grow up and to go to school. So you've got a loyal customer here and really, really appreciate everything that you do and everything that your team does.
No, it's our pleasure. And it's been a pleasure to be on your podcast, Titus. And I hope that we can continue to serve more families like yours and, yeah, do what we believe in and do it really well.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. See you next time.